do what first? The intro?
Let's do the intro. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Creative Leaders Unplugged. I'm Morgan here with Arna, and today we talk to Rachel Davis.
Yeah.
And Rachel is
Energy.
a
Sorry.
energy. That's a
Yeah.
great
Sorry. That
word.
was my first thing that came to mind. Sorry, interrupting you. But
We always
energy.
improv the intros, so it's always
Sorry. Did you have something prepared?
nope.
Sorry. All
I
right.
have my list of brilliant things that she shared, but energy is a great way to sum that conversation up.
ADHD is the other word that came to mind. Which is
Weird was
interesting, right? Yeah. A weird. Sorry. Yeah.
But that I said weird. Not that ADHD is weird, but weird was the word that she
Be
used
careful.
very often to
Yeah.
describe herself and describe things.
Yeah.
But
Being a weirdo. Yeah.
yeah.
It related, at least I think, to me and probably to you as well in many
Hmm.
ways. Being wired differently, clearly, and no, so I like the way she. I mean, it sounded like early on in life she already recognized that as a positive thing
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
embracing that. And I haven't heard a lot of people who embraced their weirdness, if you will,
Yeah.
uh, in such a way, and so it's such an easy way. I think most people have struggled more. At least people I know who have been diagnosed with things like ADHD or
Hmm.
something else.
Hmm.
They before they were, labeled that way, or before they kind of found their peace with it or whatever. They struggled with it, and it sounded that like she was really quick to embrace it, and
Yeah.
that's admirable.
I thought so as well. And I even asked at one point if she ever had any friction with that idea that she was so different, and it really didn't sound like that
Yeah.
was a part of it. And I think that's really cool to be able to embrace it
Yeah.
and she's making it work for her now, right? She's finding roles and projects for herself that fit better for her, and she said it's bringing her so much joy.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah. And so another phrase, brave space, comes to
Mm,
mind. The idea of brave space. And I mean, it's not the first time I've heard of it, but it reminded me of it again because I'm really interested in this psychological safe space. And I know it's language
mhm.
but so we don't get into the semantics of it, but brave space is a really powerful way of giving sort of more different or more meaning to safe space because it means it's active, right?
Yeah,
It's,
exactly.
yeah, it's active, which
Can
I like.
take that step. Yeah. And which is so important either for ourselves or for the organizations that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah,
And the thing that also I'm taking away from this conversation is she shares a lot about making your thoughts visible.
yeah,
And the way I think is different than maybe different than the way you think, but if I can share that with you, then we can have a conversation about it, or we can come up with new ideas. Or I
yeah,
think that's
yeah.
really something I hadn't thought of, but I'm like, that makes so much sense.
Well, and not only if you can make your thinking process visible to someone else, but I think if you make it visible for yourself, it's already an eye-opening experience because we don't really we're not really that conscious of the way we think or these thinking processes in sort of in the context of, for instance, creative problem solving.
Hmm.
I really advise people to create or at least do some journaling on
Mm.
that, right? So what exactly happens when you go through a creative process, for instance, or try to solve something? What do you do? Well, how do you so? And the way she described it as making thinking processes visible, I thought, oh yeah, that's exactly what you should be doing. It's your thinking process because we are all creatives and we're just not that conscious of it. But if you make that visible, if you make
Hmm.
that explicit, that's so helpful, not only for others, so they understand how you think, which is amazing, obviously, because you go like, oh, now this
I
is
get
why.
it.
Yeah, I get it now. I
That's
get
why
it.
your idea is like that. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But also, I bet that you didn't even think about it. You haven't really. So, because I still believe that change starts with you. It starts within
Yes.
yourself, and and change starts with reflecting on how you do things, making it visible, making it explicit, so you can change it.
Yeah.
Right?
I
Yes.
wish I had I wish I had somehow made visible the way I was thinking when I was like a young adult. I think that would be
Yeah.
fascinating. Why
So
did you do that?
yeah, why did you do that? Yeah, that I'm pretty sure that evolves, right? That evolves. So even now, do it now, and in 10 years' time, you can go back and go like, huh, interesting. Just writing down your thoughts, and because I wrote down some stuff when I was a teenager, not too much, but like few things. Because I had
Mhm.
this moment like I'm going to start a diary. It's like, but like anything else in life, I do. I start and then I give up really quick, and so but it's maybe a few pages, but still reading it now. It's so interesting. It's not like I think that I'm dumb or something or strange or weird, but it's so interesting that it's still me, but something changed, right? It's
Yeah.
different and it's familiar, but it's also very different. So it's so good to kind of be able to reflect. I couldn't, if I would not have written that, I could not reflect on it, right? So
Mm.
anyway, I think that making things visible,
Yeah.
tangible, like yeah, something you talked about as well, making things
Mhm.
tangible so you can share it.
Yeah. I think, yeah, lots of energy, lots of great ideas, and I hope you guys enjoy as well.
I'm a weirdo. So it's
That's the
funny because
first time I've ever heard that.
I'm actually reading a book right now called Embrace Your Weird. So, I embrace my weird. I'm weird. My brain works in weird ways. I like weird things. I'm obsessed with puns right now. So, I've been making lots of pun stickers. Could describe myself also as a maker. We actually turned one of our guest rooms into a maker space because my husband and I have more hobbies than friends. So we were like, let's just make this place a maker space. So we have like a laser printer, like a glow forge, a 3D printer, all the stuff to make stickers. We started a YouTube channel a while back about AI that we just lost time for. It was called Unserious AI. We have a couple of videos up there. So we have like a little mini YouTube studio in there. So it's just, my neuro spicy brain has lots of hobbies. We have lots of doom piles here, lots of weird things we explore, and I just embrace it. So,
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's so cool. So, all right. Yeah, now I have a lot of questions. So,
okay, all right,
Yes, me
ask them
too.
all.
Me
I
too.
also love questions.
As I look
So,
at my own doom piles across the
yeah,
room. Yeah.
yeah, me too. Like,
yes.
I
yeah,
like that
yeah,
phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
so funny because my husband and I were in the car the other day and we were talking about, well, we need, how like they have emotional support animals, we need an ADHD support person like to come and help us clean up our doom piles or organize our closet or clean up the maker space, right? So we kind of like wrote this ad in our head, like couples seek ADHD support person. So
That would be
yeah,
very useful. That would be
it
very,
would,
very
wouldn't
useful.
it?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, that's so funny. So, okay, first question that I would like to let's get kind of let's start at the beginning. So, because when did you start seeing yourself as a weirdo? When does that when does that happen, or where did because I can imagine that's not, you don't know that you're weird, right? Because
Not in the
unless there's
beginning.
a not
I
in the
think
beginning, right?
everyone's
Because
weird.
well,
Probably don't know what weird is, right? Because you're
exactly, you
like
don't
as a
know.
kid, right? You're like you just do everything. You don't care what people think, right? So you don't
Exactly.
think you're weird, right? Like, but I look at weird as like a positive term anyway.
Mhm.
But I think it was probably when I was probably in high school, right? Like I was a lot different than a lot of the like I was the artsy girl. I was like an honor society. I was an overachiever with my ADHD brain too,
Mm.
right? And in high school. So I just doing all the things. I played sports, I played field hockey, I did everything. So I just all the things, right? so so I was like in different friend groups, but I was like always weird. Like I always did my own thing. I was always a maker. I was always making stuff. I just I used to swing dance. There was a lot of weirdos all together in swing dancing, like in a good way, right? so yeah, but a lot of people kind of that as their outlet, right? Just kind of letting go, because swing dancing is like the street dance of ballroom, right? Because you don't have to
Hmm.
be
Right.
perfect. You don't have to you don't have to be graceful, which I am totally not. Like I tried to do Zumba once and I looked like I was having a seizure. Like I am not graceful. So like now we in the mornings, like so we just took this morning a fight conditioning class where we're like,
Hmm.
boxing punches. I probably do not look good doing that. so like cross okay, wait, what Chad? So
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, but ADHD, I mean, you mentioned that a couple of times now.
I did.
Yeah, when did you know that? When was that?
Well,
I mean, when
I am
discovered?
not like diagnosed with it, but I am
Uh,
clearly
you
right.
don't need the
I,
diagnosis. You're like, I
I don't like
know.
doctors in general. so, but clearly I am, there's something going on spicy up in that brain, right?
Mhm.
And that's been my whole life from overachieving to now where I have all my hobbies doom piles, start a list, forget I made the list.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Start a new planner, get 2 weeks into the planner, forget the planner exists, right? Those things. So,
And so even though you haven't been diagnosed, which is fine, like
hmm
self-diagnosis is a very valid way of
hmm
approaching ADHD. But did you just embrace that, or did you ever struggle with that? Because you said you're weird, you always kind of knew you were doing your own thing. Like
hmm
was that ever something that you encountered friction with, or did you just always embrace it and always have like very optimistic and a positive association with that?
I think, early on, I didn't care. Right? Like I just did my thing. When I first, so I've had about like 20 years in the professional world, right? And when I first, my first jobs out of college, I was still kind of stuck in that overachiever perfection state. And so for
Hmm.
me, I think it's affected me in a way where I always tried. I'm a recovering perfectionist now. So I think the way that it affected me most was, even though I was like, this is okay, this is how I am, I was like, well, I'm going to be the best of how I am. I'm going to be the best weirdo, right? like I'm going to
Competitive
be the
weirdos,
most
yes.
perfect,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm going to be the best, right? And so, but even trying to just kind of be perfect in what I was doing in my jobs and things. And over time, I learned that excellence is not the same thing as perfection. And it kind of pushed me in a direction. So, like, we run community workshops, mural board improv, my co-facilitator John and I, and we specifically started those to help. Well, it was for me, it was to help me get out of my perfection brain, right? And just kind of let people mess around on a mural board, like, and not worry about like the messy and what's happening, right?
Mhm.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know that it's interesting because I think both Morgan and I are thinking because I think we're both also weirdos. So in that
Definitely.
sense, so
Yes,
we're like,
weirdos unite.
yeah, totally, totally, yeah, for sure. I too have more hobbies than friends, so because I have a lot of hobbies, and I actually don't want to see them as hobbies. I actually don't like hobbies at all. To me, they're all ambitions, and
Yeah,
they're not
I
hobbies at
like
all.
that.
Yeah, which is like, yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I take them very serious. But it's interesting that what you're saying is also really fascinating in the sense that because most people, when you feel you're different, than others, you struggle a little bit with that. You go like, oh, because we're all part of this system that kind of demands certain things
Hmm.
of you, certain behaviors, et cetera.
Yes.
And so finding your way in that system can be quite
Oh,
difficult,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
So how do you explain
Well,
that
I
you
think
were
the
like,
first
I'm
step
okay?
for me was getting out of my corporate golden handcuffs, right?
Mm,
Because it affected both my work life and my personal life, right?
right.
I worked in very regulated corporate environments for over a decade, and they're just not creative spaces. And I think that what's interesting about that is it stifled me at work, but it allowed me to have more creative ambitions outside of
Mhm,
work.
mhm,
And so I don't think I would have started as many things outside of work if I was in a more creative field. So for
Mm,
me, like I look back on that as a positive, like I was looking for that elsewhere. So I was able to do things like swing dancing. I actually started rock climbing. That's something my husband and I used to do together before we were even dating. And there was a rock climbing gym across from we met at work, and we would go rock climbing. um that was also something I did because I was scared of heights. And I was like, oh well, let me do this so I can try to get over my fear of heights. I'm on a rope, it'll be okay. So, but it was indoor rock climbing. Like I don't know if I could go in the real mountains and rock climb. But it was stuff like that, just out because there wasn't any outlet for me, no matter how much I tried to create that.
mm,
There
yeah.
just wasn't in that environment. And then after about a decade of that, I was like, yeah, this is enough. It's sucking my soul. And I started to go into more creative environments, but there were a lot of missteps there, a lot of things I won't ever do again. And I think really it wasn't until I started my own consulting business that I really was able to kind of embrace the way I work best and the
Mm,
weirdo that I am. And I still have a lot to learn there, right? But the first part of it is vocalizing it, right? Like I did at the beginning of this podcast, right? I think so for the past 7 years has been really where I've been able to blur that line between what I do and who I am.
mm. Yeah. And how did you, because you talk about the golden handcuffs, and sometimes I hear people talk about the golden cage. Like
Uh-huh.
they'll leave a certain institution and they'll return a year or two later. I say, I thought you left. And they're
Oh
like,
yeah.
it's Hotel California. Like you you always
I
find
actually
your way back. And
Yeah. Well, I actually went through that in a different way. So one of the companies is in that kind of circle of companies that I worked with previously. When I became a consultant, I did like contracting work for them, and then they
mm,
asked me to go and work full time for them. So it was great when I was doing the contracting work. Then when I went back to work full time for them and I went back into that corporate 9 to 5 grind, I wasn't able to dictate how I work or those types of things. I was like, yeah, I couldn't tell that it wasn't working until they just let me go when COVID happened. And I was like, oh, all right, well now I'm just gonna go do other things.
so was
So
COVID kind of like the crunch point where you switched from the corporate, you were like, okay, I guess this is as good a time as any to switch from the corporate world to doing things that work better for me?
I actually did it before COVID. There was just a year in there, like right before COVID. And when COVID started, that I went back to full time with a company. And it was just horrible timing because I was there for a year and then COVID hit and they were
mm,
like, nope, you creative people first to go.
Sure,
So
sure.
and I was remote too. And a lot of people were not remote around that time as well. So they were like still adjusting to, okay, well, how are we going to be remote with our local people?
Hmm.
Do we still, can we still pay the same attention to our non-local people? Because I was like the only one in the company who was remote. So, and then COVID hit. But yeah, I was doing consulting before that. And even before that, my husband Wes and I, while we were dating, he started a digital consultancy when we were still in Baltimore, and I helped run that. So that was my first taste of, okay, I like this kind of working for myself thing, but I will never have my own employees because this is horrible.
Mm,
mm, mm, mm,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Yes. I hear you. I so I'm still a bit intrigued about, where it all started, because
Hmm.
I think that's such a
Sure.
because it sounds to me that the way, you embraced sort of your, the way you are, the way you
Yeah.
work, your, the ADHD, the sort of that I think a lot of people struggle with that, and it might be just because it's just in your character to look at it that way and to say, well, I'm
Yeah.
different, I'm just going to embrace everything and it's great. But is it also, I mean, is there something in, for instance, your family, or is that something that, that that it was accepted, or is there something there that I mean, were your parents weirdos as well, or, or were they like,
My
what
dad
did,
is very ambitious and overachieving as well from that kind of aspect. And they were always very just accepting who I am. My parents now run a animal sanctuary
oh,
in Florida, and it's just because that was their dream. They went for their ambition, right? And just I think just being having that type of role model in them, like, hey, we're ready to drop everything, move to Florida, get some donkeys and goats and do our thing, right? So
sounds great. Well, yeah,
Florida
no, what
sounds
that's a
like
good
the
point.
place for this as well. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have images in my head now. Yeah, but that is no, but I mean, I think that's really important, because I think if you,
Mhm.
your what, whether it's role models or examples, or at least allowing people, when you see that there are options, or you see
Hmm.
that things
Yeah.
you can actually do some different things. You can just drop everything and just go and do something else and follow your
Yeah.
passion. If you don't have
Yeah.
those examples in your life,
Right.
it's probably going to be more
Yeah.
difficult, I guess.
Yeah. And I
And
I
oh, go ahead.
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, I knew of a girl once who we got along well because we both had the same kinds of brains and, and interests and curiosity. But she came from a super ambitious and successful and kind of more traditional family. Like, this is
Mm,
the route to success. It includes your bachelor's, it includes your master's, it includes a PhD. These are the steps. This is what it looks like.
yeah.
And so she didn't have the examples or the support to follow then what was
Hmm.
really calling out to her. And I just remember, because my family was also very supportive
Yeah.
and like, no, just do what feels best for
Hmm.
you. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But I remember thinking, like, why wouldn't your parents do that? But I can also, now that I'm a bit
Yeah.
older, I can see, of course, that there's so
Yeah.
many different ways of looking at things. But
And it's kind of a balance here with me. So when I talk about my mom, she, for all intents and purposes, she's my mom, but I also have a biological mom before my dad
sure.
remarried, and she was not a good role model, right? So it was really kind of difficult in the beginning there until my mom came into my life
Mhm.
as a good role model. And so it was a weird kind of shift for me as well, because my dad is very ambitious like that. He has a law degree, right? He has a master's and a doctorate. And my mom also has a master's, and I think she has a doctorate. So many degrees, right? My husband as well, all the schools, right? So, but he had a weird path because he went into the military. So it's now he's doing a lot of the schooling now. So for me, I did think that was the path. So I actually went, so I have an undergraduate degree and I started a master's program. And I actually was scared to tell my dad that I didn't want to finish my master's
Mm.
program because I was actually all the way at the end. And it was going too long because my committee had left the university, most of it. And, my advisor, like every time I go meet her, she's like, what's your topic again on your thesis? And I was like, I can't keep paying you continuing education credits because we're starting over every time we talk. Right. And so I finished it with having a master's certificate and didn't finish the complete degree. But I don't think I use anything that I learned in school in what I do now. Right. Like for me, I feel like I kind of just use all the knowledge around
Mm.
school and my experience. So it's a very different kind of balance. Like I feel like I mean my dad's always supported me, right? But I think it's like it's not like super traditional mindset that he has, but he's always kind of taught me in that way, being diligent in school and finances and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting, right? So I have, I mean, I finished high school and that's it,
hmm.
because I didn't fit in mainly, to be honest. So I was diagnosed with dyslexia, but I think ADHD. I think it was available back then, but I didn't get it. I'm not sure why not, because now I'm thinking, I think I have that too,
I
but
think it's just the norm now. Like if you look at the majority of people that have
yeah,
it, I think more people have it than not.
yeah, yeah.
I disagree with that, but I think
Oh,
we find each other very quickly. So for us, it
oh,
feels like that.
yeah,
But
that's
no,
true.
it's not the norm. It's not the norm.
No,
No.
I don't think
No.
so either, but I think everyone can get some kind of a label somehow. I mean, I
Yeah,
think everyone
Yeah,
has,
we all struggle with something,
right?
definitely.
We all struggle with something and
yeah.
might have different names, but I think we all struggle trying to act normal and professional. And, I
Fitting
think
into the
that's
system. Yeah.
fit into the system. I think we all struggle with that because it's not
The system
very
sucks.
humane.
It's when you
Yeah.
tell your weirdo self to get in the back seat for a while. Just be like, "Can you just sit down there?
Yeah.
Don't make me
Please.
pull this car over."
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I had my my weirdo in the front seat at the steering wheel for a long time, and but I just didn't fit it in, and so I really didn't like the school system.
Mhm.
I didn't that was didn't work for me. So, but I love learning, and so but to me that's a continuous. I mean, you learn all the
Yeah.
time, right? And so I think although, and if I look at my kids now, my daughter, she's 18 and she's going to university next year. She has a gap year now. And I think that going through the school system does teach you something, because it is also about going through a system that if you struggle with it, not everybody struggles with it, but if you struggle with it, it teaches you to kind of go through things you don't like and dealing with a system that is difficult and
Mhm.
hard and
Yeah.
and et cetera. So I think it's still been something that I has been very valuable for me, because it taught me something so much about myself,
Yeah.
and so it's not just about the content or like the books you read or the topics or whatever
Mhm.
you learn about, but it's also just dealing with that,
Yeah.
needing to be there in time, sitting down like for an hour just listening to this boring person talking about math. I
It
don't
taught
care
me
about.
it's something I never ever want to do again.
Again, yeah, taught me like I don't want this. It's still you have, and that right then in that moment you already know that, and
Yeah.
still they're going to test you on this.
It did. You're right, though. It taught me. So, I have an interesting way of studying that I learned in college. I am very visually stimulated. So, I
Mhm.
actually used to go into the rooms where the tests were going to be, because I am not a good test taker. I would go into the rooms where the tests were going to be and study in those rooms, because visual cues in the
Yeah,
room would remind me of what I was reading when I was in the
that's
room.
really clever. Yeah.
But I
Notice,
couldn't do it
notice.
otherwise, because my brain was just so, I think, chaotic when I would sit down for a test and I was like worrying about all the other things I had on my plate that day. And it was just, I'm
Yeah.
not a good test taker.
Right,
I'm
but
like,
that's so interesting, right? Because that's what I try to tell my kids as well. So my son, he's 12. He's just going to go through all of this, and
Yep.
I remind him, like, there's two ways you go through school. Yes, there's all this content that you're going to learn about,
mhm,
history and all that stuff, and he's still very interested in this, but you're also going to have to take these tests, and that's a
Yeah.
skill in itself. Like,
mhm.
the
Yeah.
teacher will ask you a question, it's on paper, and then you have to go like, what exactly does that question mean? And then your brain goes off in all these places, but
Yes.
interpretation of the question is to me, it was always like, it can mean many things.
Yeah. I had the same. Like, it
Yeah.
depends.
It depends,
It,
right?
it
So
depends. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I always had that. Like, it depends.
Yeah.
And so you have to, so the psychology is really important, that what that teacher or the school is trying to ask you. So you have
Yeah.
to, it's not just a question, but it's also knowing like, oh, this is, because what did I learn? What do they want to hear from me?
I
Like,
call
oh,
that learning the test. And
Yeah.
so for me, it wasn't always, I mean, it was, like when I got my project management certification, you basically learn how to pass the test.
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, because I am not a fan of the school system overall, because I think it strips away curiosity from
Yes,
people, right?
for sure.
Because you ask the question, you're expecting a certain answer, right? There's
Hmm.
no room for critical or creative problem solving, right? And that, I think, is why I didn't enjoy it much, right? I was like, okay, I'll start, I'll do the master's thing, but then I was like, this is really boring.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I was homeschooled for half of my life, and then
Mhm.
I went back to public school. So I got to see, and you can do homeschooling in different types of ways, but we got stuff done, but it was in a very loosely structured way. We'd wake up and my mom would say, okay, these are the assignments you need to complete today. Do them as you wish. They have to be done by 3 o'clock. And we
Mhm.
weren't allowed to watch TV during the day,
Mhm.
so I couldn't
Mhm.
be, but as long as my assignments were done by 3 o'clock, it was fine.
Yeah.
So that if I wanted to go paint or color or something during the day,
Yeah.
that was fine. If I wanted to read a chapter book, also no problem.
Yeah.
And so then it was very interesting to go back to public school and see how the
Yeah.
system is completely different. But it's just
Yeah.
fascinating how we can structure learning and
Mhm.
creating those types of environments for people to get curious and to have critical
Yeah.
thoughts about things and to be
It's
inspired.
interesting you say that, though, about homeschooling, right? And when my husband started his company and we were kind of running that, one of our values, and still a value today, is big kid rules, right? Like, basically give, like, exactly what you said, Morgan, give
Mm,
the goal, and however you get there by, when the time I tell you need to get there by, great.
yeah, a lot of autonomy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because you teach kids and then teenagers and young adults, basically the school system, the way I guess the way it's been designed way back, it kind of mirrors the way you expect them to start working also in companies,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
In
So
industry, though, manufacturing is how they
right.
were created.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it kind of it prepares you for that life, but just you know on so many levels, that's not what you're going to get when you go in. But on a certain level, it's still there. So a lot of corporates still work that way. You
Yeah.
still kind
Hmm.
of, but
But
that's
should
not.
they?
No, of course they shouldn't, and I don't think, and they know, yeah, and this is the crazy bit because
Wait, this is the
no,
crazy bit? No,
well,
just kidding.
there are a lot of crazy bits, but the crazy bit is that they shouldn't, and they know they shouldn't, because if you
Hmm.
talk to anyone in a large organization, and I mean, most people are smart enough
Yeah.
to realize that that's actually
Mhm.
not the way forward. That's not how you should work. But they still do because they're part of this system, and the system defends
Hmm.
itself.
The
It
way it's always been.
yeah, but it's so as an
No, that's
individual,
their answer, right?
well,
Like,
yeah,
why don't you change it? That's the way it's always been.
well, it's the way it's always been, and I think they just don't know how to change it because they
Yeah.
feel powerless.
Hmm.
And even if you're the CEO of a
Hmm.
company, you feel it's really dangerous to change it because you don't really know what's going to happen.
Right.
Because actually, you don't really know what you're doing. So all you know is trying to maintain that system and keep that in place.
Yeah.
But people are changing, expectations are changing, your
Yeah.
relationship to work is changing. We don't want to be stuck in the proverbial
And
cubicle,
the work itself is changing.
and the work itself is changing, and companies
Yeah.
need to be creative and innovative and all that,
Hmm.
and so the system doesn't allow that. So what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
But it's so
Hmm.
interesting the way you talked about that, right? So relate it to, like, upgrading your computer, right? Like, different operating systems. If you wait and wait and wait and wait because you don't want to upgrade your computer, next time you try to do that, how long is that upgrade going to take? Because you're now, what, 10 versions behind on your, right? Like,
Mm.
that's the same thing with trying to advance the culture of work, right? If you keep waiting and waiting because you think it's going to be such a big effort, it's going to be 100 times that effort by the time that you actually get to it, because there's such a big delta in that change.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
an
And
interesting analogy.
yeah, and the your competitors that start
hmm
emerging, they are, they already have the new software, right? And
hmm
so you are trying to catch up with them, but you're always behind.
Mhm.
Hmm.
A lot of companies, and I was reading up on this the other day, how it's so fascinating that. So I was working for this bank, and I actually was talking about this article I was reading on how companies are still structured the way they were structured in the Industrial Revolution, the first
Mhm.
kind of Industrial
Yeah.
Revolution, where, you have this pyramid shape where, this bunch of, people on top, but most of them are on the bottom, and they're even, they're considered human, but barely, right? And
No, they're considered resources.
they're
That's why we
resource.
have human resources.
Exactly, right? Well, exactly.
Yep.
That's where that language comes from, which is
Yes.
crazy. We were not resources. Anyway. But but a lot of companies are still structured that way.
Mhm.
So, and the article was about how it's so weird that these individuals working at this company, most of them, or a lot of them, or I don't know how many, but most of them they will have a household, they will have family, maybe they have children, they're responsible, they need to pay their mortgage, they have to buy food, they have to take care of family, right? So they're responsible adults. Then they go to work, and then they have to, their boss is checking whether they're in time. Didn't they take, is there, the time they took for coffee, wasn't that too long,
They
etc.
treat them
So
like little kids, not
as
big kids.
kids, all of a sudden they're children. And I was talking about this like as if that was in the past. And so these people from the bank said, Arne, they still do. They
Oh yeah.
still, they still do. And I was like, how can you
Think about timesheet checking in. Oh my goodness.
exactly?
That's like, I have like timesheet PTSD from working in the corporate world and being like, I don't even know how to, you know, remember what I did the last hour, make me like go
Yeah.
to a specific project, and my brain jumps around so much. Like when I used to work for design agencies, like you have to charge everything to a certain client for the certain amount
Mhm.
of time. And I'm just like, but I do them all at once, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
How do I
Yeah.
timesheet that? How do
And I had my
uh
best ideas when I was taking a shower. Can I count? Does that like,
yeah, it's just so weird. But like you're talking about kind of how they treat people at work, and it's just it's it's this old guard mentality of the type of people who are still, I think, in leadership positions. And I know that's changing as new generations come in. But the only way the new generations are getting promoted is by mimicking the
Yeah.
mindset of the people who are currently in leadership. So it's this weird self-fulfilling prophecy of the people, like you don't get promoted if you're not, in the good old boys club, right?
Mhm.
And it's just keeping that mentality at the top and not letting the weirdos in.
So how do we change that?
Yeah, like so.
I'm thinking of
Y-
like the people that either start their own companies, and I wish I could remember the name, but there was one guy who instantly, or not instantly, but they're a really successful company based out of California, but they transitioned to I think unlimited holidays.
oh,
And
I have some stories about that.
everyone's like, you can't do this. This is a terrible business move. Everyone's going to take unlimited holidays. They're never going to come back to work. And
Hmm.
it's worked really, really successfully. And I think, yeah, and but he had to start his own company. And
Yeah.
and
I think that's it, right? Like the people with those mindsets and the drive to be able to make it work. So I actually worked for a design agency when we moved here to San Antonio. It was one I did in person. And one of the things they sold me on was unlimited PTO, unlimited time off. And I think I wasn't even there like 3 months, and they decided to reverse that policy and
oh,
only give a certain amount of time off based on your tenure. And I was the
Mm.
newest employee, right? And I was like, well, this is kind of a bait and switch. And it was and what's funny is no one on the team was abusing this privilege. It
mm,
was just, I guess maybe they had like a business advisor who had advised them that it was
Mhm.
losing
Sounds like
money
it.
for them, right? And I think it's just like people get scared
Mhm.
yeah.
when they implement a change. And if you don't, first of all, if you don't stick with a change long enough to actually see the outcomes of it, I mean, you need to be able to pivot quickly. Like if you see something's not working, pivot. But if you're like, well, I'm not sure if this is working or not, and you just get rid of it,
Yeah.
like you like do something to see if it's working first.
Yeah.
It'd be
So,
interesting to know though why they changed, because you know, typically things like this change because a new manager comes in, and or there's an
this is a
advice
very
on.
small team though. Six
Yeah.
people?
Oh, really? That's very odd.
Yeah. So, I don't know what it was on that. Like I drive myself crazy trying to figure out the inside of other people's brains. I would never want someone to figure out the inside of my brain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
So,
But
yeah. Good.
I was thinking of, or a friend and I were kind of talking about failure the other day and how not in the creative space, but more the general world,
mm,
right? Especially corporate and everything. Failure is never seen as a gold star or, good job, you failed. It's always seen as this thing to be avoided at all costs. But when we can take like small risks and have small fails, right? Maybe giving unlimited, holidays would be a small fail. Is it
mhm,
going to completely ruin the company? I don't think so. But it could have been a small fail.
yeah.
But I think the people that are willing to allow small failures or try things that are have the possibility to fail are kind of the people that are adopting the new operating systems, right? You adopt a
Mhm.
new operating system, sure, there's maybe glitches or bugs along the way, but then it's a smaller thing that you can adjust rather than, yeah, being a bit behind the times and
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to, your incremental updates in
Mhm.
software, right? Like continuous improvement, right? Continuously looking at things that drive that culture forward instead of so many companies look at culture initiatives as like a one and done thing. Like it's
Mhm.
a big thing we have to spend a lot of money on and we have to do that, and then it's not. It's an everyday, daily
Culture
thing, and
will be fixed by next month.
exactly. It's on our quarter two planning, and
Yeah.
it's very hard
Really?
because I have a background as a brand strategist, and a lot of my workshopping is around brand strategy workshopping and things like that. And the way people view brand and culture across different types of companies is just it just boggles my mind sometimes. And Arna, you were talking about, well, how do we change that, right? The
Mm.
move from the old guard kind of mindset to a new way of working. And I think, Morgan, it's what you said. Like people need to be willing to either start their own companies. I think acquisitions help in this a lot because I've seen companies be acquired by other
Mm.
companies, and I've helped with kind of combining cultures in that case. And being, if people are able to take the best things from each and bring together with a new culture, I think that provides a lot of opportunity in terms of acquisitions. Because if a larger company is acquiring a really like forward thinking startup, if that startup can, if they're not going to just gobble them up, right? If
Hmm.
that startup can influence their thinking, they're like, well, why did you acquire us? Well, it's because we operate this way,
Hmm.
right? So,
That's really interesting. I think also very difficult to do well, because I think acquiring companies with the intention to change your culture,
Yeah.
I think
oh,
that,
it's a side effect in my mind, not
yeah,
a,
well, it's a side effect, but if you're not
yeah.
conscious about it,
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, I've so many examples of where that actually went
I was
wrong.
I was
Especially.
hired to a team and everyone in the
Mm,
team said our culture needs to shift. We're
uh,
not we're no longer satisfied with the current culture. And they had hired a bunch of new people and I was part of this
mhm.
and but later kind of came to find out they just thought that hiring new people would change the culture. Which is of course the not how it works. And that to me
That's not
was
how that
and that to
works.
me was really interesting, right? Because you also, when you step into a new culture, as people, we also try to acclimate
Yeah.
and get used to it. Okay, how
But
can I fit into the
culture,
culture
yeah,
here?
but because culture is such it's actually so misunderstood, I think.
Oh,
Because
yes.
culture is you and how you behave. The way you behave and the way you see things and act, and how you relate to the others. That is, and then that's then that is culture. So if you want to change culture, you have to change yourself. you
Mhm,
have to
mhm.
change. Your
Yeah.
behavior needs to change. And
And your
so,
behavior is being dictated
yeah, of
by
course, by the system, because it,
the system.
yeah, because it's, yeah, because you get your bonus because you act in a certain way and not in another way. And so, of course, so that is what it is. But in order to change it, you have to change. I mean, you can't expect someone else
Mhm.
coming in and then changing the system because, or the way people behave. So it's
Yeah.
really tough.
It's
So
really
it
tough.
needs small steps, and it needs a very conscious sort of effort and a lot of knowledge about who are you and how do you act. And so
Mhm.
so it's a really
So
difficult thing to do.
yeah, you made an interesting point there, Arna, because if you think about what is dictating the systems of companies, which then in turn dictates the behavior of the people they want to find successful, and success is defined in a certain way, right,
Mhm,
for that
mhm.
company. I think small steps are great, but I don't think they're going to make any impact unless you get to really the core of why companies behave now the way they do. And it's because of how they measure success and what they believe
Absolutely.
to be
Yeah,
success, right? We got
absolutely.
the KPIs and money, and I
Yes.
think a lot of it is that core mindset of the CEO or the founder or something, right? Like, or overall business, like how in the business world, like what is the measure of success right now, and is that the right
Yeah.
measure of success?
But it's a
Mm,
chicken and an egg situation,
Yeah, it
yeah.
is.
right? So where do you, so what comes first? I mean, are you changing the KPIs, or are you changing behavior? So where do you start? Because nobody's going to change the KPIs because of the behavior, because it's scary and you're going to break the
I think they
system and everything.
should.
Well, they should, but I haven't, and I think everybody thinks that, and everybody knows this,
Yeah.
but nobody does it, and there's a reason
Mhm.
for it, and it's because it's scary, and so
Do you
I,
know any companies who are doing it? Like, could you
yeah,
think
sure,
of an
sure.
example of a company that is doing it the way you think?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
for sure. I mean, there's companies. I mean, I know of a company. They, for instance, have failure parties.
That's
And they
yeah.
awesome.
try to, right, and they try to kind of, or I think it's Google that they give you sort of, if you stop working on a project,
Uh-huh.
right, they have this kind of I don't know what it is, what kind of tradition they have at the moment, but they have this ritual. So
Mm-hmm.
they ritualize this and they celebrate that you end it instead of just keep going when you know it's already,
Mm,
Oh,
it's
love
not
that.
successful, right?
Celebrating the right things and the small failures and the small successes and all those things.
Exactly. So there's companies doing that, but then
Mhm.
if you start talking to people and it's like, yeah, when I know there is still a big problem to really, really change your culture around that, because we still teach, and we go back to school again, we still teach our children,
Mm.
you know, what success looks like, what behavior looks like.
yeah.
There's a question, you need an answer. You need to be professional, you
Mhm.
need to be
And you have to
secure.
be right the first time.
You have to be right the first time. If it's not the second time, that doesn't count.
Not
Uh,
the first five ideas are always the shittiest
yeah,
ideas in my mind, and I think that's the mindset we need. Get past, but
yeah,
in school, like you said, and in work, if it's not the first quick idea, it's not. They don't. They want the right one right away, right? Like
exactly.
you have to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I was, was teaching this course the other day where I talked about the problem space and the solution space, right? So we have this, I like double diamond because it shows sort
Mhm.
of, you're in the problem
Yep.
space, you're not in the solution space. And it's always the same conversation. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, the same
Yep.
conversation. Right. I know, but we start, because everybody starts with solutions, right?
Yeah.
Oh
And we go,
yes.
oh, and we go, and go, here we go again. And I say,
Yeah.
no, start with problem, you're in the problem space. If you don't understand the problem you're
Hmm.
solving, etc. We know the drill,
Yeah.
but
I used to
this,
run a problem framing workshop and drill that in people. Frame the
yeah, yeah,
problem. Define
yeah.
the problem.
Yeah. But okay, but human nature is to kind of jump to solutions, right? Which is
Yes.
which is okay. So park them. We have tricks for this, and
Yes.
reality is sometimes you start with the solution. Okay, fine, but then at least
Mhm.
learn. Have an iterative approach to it. But we start. The problem starts because we are wired that way. We wire people
Yes.
that way.
Mhm.
And so we need to rewire them. And this understanding of
Unlearn.
unlearn. Yeah, exactly. Unlearn. So I try to kind of tell them about, make one thing, make that journey of the way you do problem solving, make that explicit. Make notes. If you go through a project, write it down. What do you do? Because everyone has to understand at least the brief, whether that, we call that the problem, or if you've done the
Mhm.
proper research or not, but at least you have to understand the problem before
Yeah.
you into a solution. We all do that, except you don't see it as a process. You don't see it as a sort of a way you go through
Mm.
things. So I think it's we are all creatives. We're all in
Yeah.
human, or some human
Oh,
nature.
yeah. You're speaking my language now. That's my favorite book, Creative Confidence.
Right.
You're all born creative.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
we take it for granted, and we don't reflect on the way we actually do things. In my mind, so creative problem solving, design thinking, service,
Yep.
whatever, label we want to put on
Mhm.
it, it's
Back to
common.
labels.
Well, yeah, but it's common sense. It's just like
Yes.
that's how we do things, except that we're not
Yeah.
conscious of it, and just making our way of problem solving and creativity more conscious and more explicit.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
actually what design thinking was,
Yeah.
meant to do, and it didn't really work, but it was meant to create this mindset of this is how
Yeah.
we use this
Yeah.
as human beings.
I
Yeah.
would I
So
would
it's
teach I would teach business students design
mhm.
thinking. And these
Yep.
were always my favorite moments because they're creative. They're solving problems. They're using their brain. But then when you're able to make it explicit for them and say, "No, this is what they have that moment of realization. Oh, that is what's
Yeah.
happening." Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
it's really
really doing
interesting you
it.
talk about that. If we go back to our weird, right? Full circle to our weird, right? A lot of people bury their weird in their brain and don't make that visible. It's there,
Exactly.
but they're not making it visible. So just like the
Mhm.
Yes.
creative problem solving, it might be something you're doing in your head, but you're not making that visible. And I think having moved to kind of a more collaborative work environment as well and culture, it's more important than ever to kind of make those thinking processes visible
I
because
like that. Yeah.
that's kind of how you collaborate with others. And I used to do a lot of design thinking as well. I actually, community is really important to me. And I was on the AIGA Professional Association for Design Board, and they actually ran with IBM. They had IBM do a in-person design thinking facilitator training, especially for the board. And so I was able to kind of go to New York to their headquarters, and that was actually one of my first kind of aha moments that facilitation. Yes, this is the
Mm.
thing that I want to do. But it was really interesting because the whole workshop and training was about making those things visible, right? Let's listen to some the other day as well from a fellow facilitator that talked about as a facilitator being a master collector and being able to document the insights in the room or have people document their own insights and kind of collecting and making those thoughts visible, right? And I think that's a lot of what these processes are about. And I think that's a lot of mindset in general. Like I'm a lot more comfortable with making my weird visible now,
Mhm.
right? So it's it's just about
Well,
putting things
but
out into the
because
world.
Yeah.
you are comfortable doing that, so you make other people comfortable doing that,
Yeah.
I hope
right?
so.
Yeah.
Of course you do,
I hope
because
so. And
that.
but see, that's hard because sometimes it's not, right?
But I mean,
Sometimes
even today, so I speak a little bit of Dutch, but I'm not very confident with my
mm,
speaking. So I always hesitate and I usually then just default to English. I'm working on it. But but I went to the store today and the worker was talking to the guy and it was clear that he was learning Dutch, but she was such a kind listener and she was really encouraging as he was stumbling through his Dutch and asking, what's the best thing that I should buy. And so instantly, then when it was my turn, I felt so much more comfortable because I knew, okay, she's kind or she's embracing this. And it was so easy for me to have an
yeah.
entire conversation. I was like, am I getting better at Dutch? And I was like, no, actually, I mean, a little bit, but I think it was just because she had created that space
Yeah.
for me that it really enabled it. I left there feeling like, oh, I'm better at this than I realized.
You
Yeah.
just gave the perfect definition for what I call a brave space, right? And so it's something that I like to create a lot in my workshopping, it's a more active than safe space, right? It's encouraging people to stand up and do something as opposed to just making people feel accepted,
Mm,
right? And so create, and I think it's something we need to create in companies for the culture. You need to create a brave space where people feel like they can stand up and do something differently. It's really, I mean, I could talk about this all day long, but it's really interesting. So I don't, they do this in some companies still, but I don't know if you remember the big boom where every company was trying to create an innovation lab, right?
yes.
And
Yes,
it
and
was
they
like
closed them all
completely
down.
separate.
Ugh.
Well, because it was completely separate from the operations of the business, and that's not
Yep.
how you innovate. They
Mhm.
were like creating this little like pod of innovation that was like, well, okay, it
The
doesn't
space of
affect.
weirdos, the
Yeah,
weirdos space.
yeah, it was the misfits, right? It was a place for the misfits when that should be the whole company,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
We opened
So,
the where I work, they had opened an innovation playground, right? And it was a
mhm.
spectacular space. And funding was shifted. They had to make some decisions. And so now it's just this empty room and I walk by and I
Oh,
cry.
Oh,
that is
that's it,
such,
and that's
my
what they
God.
do, right? They create this like separate environment when it should be more integrated
Yeah.
into the overall culture, right? And
It
it's
is
just crazy.
horrible. It's horrible because those spaces, especially because when they have funding and they create this amazing space, it
Mhm.
makes everyone feel so weird and but in the wrong way. So you feel like, oh, now I have to be creative. Now, oh, now this is we're now in the space where we need to kind
Very
of uh
inauthentic.
yeah, so
Yeah.
inauthentic. And it's such a I don't know why people do that. Because it makes it sort of. I know the intention was right because it just didn't
Yeah.
work the other way, right? And they checked
Yeah.
it, sure, but it's also. I mean, I know people who've launched these kind of labs, and
Yep. I've
their
helped launch
intention.
them.
Well, yeah, there you go. So I helped too because it seemed like the only possible way, but also the intention was that everyone would kind of go there and it was
Yeah.
open to
Yeah.
everyone, and there should be sort of a program and et cetera, et cetera. So there was some kind of philosophy around that seemed to be a possible way. So
Yeah.
if you look at it from the angle of the way we do our the way we think, it's a great experiment. Well,
Yes.
and what did we learn? But the problem I have, it's not so much that they opened all these spaces and then closed them. I don't think they've learned anything from
Yeah.
opening them and closing them. I don't think anybody really documented and really did research, proper
So
research. What did it actually do?
I
What
agree.
intervention?
okay, funny enough, we had this space, and it was also when I was a student. And being an international student, it was really valuable to kind of have this community space.
Mhm.
And so it was an innovation playground. All of the students, well, not all of the students, the more creatively focused students would go there. And then, of course, the funding decisions came around and they decided to close the innovation playground. And it was during my last year of studies, and I was like heartbroken. I was like, this
Mm.
place is so valuable to me. It really was an important community. And so I worked together with some researchers to study the value of the space, Arna. And it was really interesting. So we turned it into a research paper and presented at some
Mm,
conferences.
Oh,
And so people were then
I'd
able
love
to
to read
share.
them.
Yeah, so I'm happy to share. And but so we also got to talk to the people who weren't as enthusiastic about this space. And of course the design students were there, the coding student, the IT students were there, but the students who were studying more traditional things, business, law, finance, they didn't feel invited or included in this
mm,
space,
Mm,
and they felt that it was too far for them to relate. So
mm,
then, of course, when the administration was looking at this space, they said, yeah, okay, a few students really value this, but it's not necessarily
mm.
serving the whole population like we wanted to.
That's a really interesting point, and it's actually something I do as a facilitator is meeting people where they are. And I think a lot of times people get overly excited about an idea, and you want people to get excited about an idea, but I think with how big the delta that we were talking about right now
Mhm.
is between that traditional, industrial revolution mindset and system to where we want to be, because that's such a wide chasm. I think you have to have this let's meet some people where they are mindset. And that is really hard for me sometimes when I'm doing like a really kind of creative workshop or something like that. But I've learned to kind of meet some of those personalities where they are and adapt and pivot to the type of people in the room. I really research ahead of time now, like what is the
That's smart.
technology expertise of the people who are going to be joining me. Like I do a lot of one-on-one interviews sometimes with participants to kind of get them a bit more comfortable. And I don't think it's always going to be like that, where that chasm is that big. But I feel like we have to give a little on the creative side too to meet people where they are, whether we want to or not.
Yeah, and if we want more people to join in the process, or have them leave our time together with a specific learning or outcome, then of course
Yeah.
meeting people where they are is paramount.
So,
Yeah.
Rachel,
Yes.
you are as a facilitator.
Yes.
What would you tell people who are just starting out and wanting to be a facilitator? And it's interesting because I think I call myself facilitator nowadays. I don't know when, where I became a facilitator. It just happened.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what that was. Sort of like, but start out. What?
Yeah.
What would you tell people?
So there's a couple things, but the biggest thing is actually the banner on my LinkedIn. Everything's a prototype, just like we were talking about earlier in experimentation. It does not have to be perfect to start, right? Like you can iterate, you can have an idea of something, find your people, find a facilitator community. There is a lot out there, and test out your ideas. Go have a little sandbox session. I run my own community sessions every month called Wonder and Workshops, and I just kind of invite people in. Sometimes there's a topic or a workshop I run. Like this past month, it was a fishbowl panel about the challenges that facilitators have, and we all kind of came and answered each other's questions. Like find those communities, and we were talking about this earlier, make your thoughts visible, right? Like don't keep it in your head, like put it out there. Do a workshop. My husband and I are running an in-person workshop coming up here in San Antonio for a developer community, for developers, coders, right? And we're doing a Lego Serious Play workshop. It's going to be very, very different for them, but it's a really nice place to try something like that out with that community, because it is a community event with like a tech day, right? And it's something that we're just giving of our time to do because we really care about community. Like when we were in Baltimore, we started Code for Baltimore under Code for America, right? Like we really care about having these spaces where people can start to bring those ideas out of their head and into thinking in public, right? I think building in public, right? Thinking in public. And that's hard for some people. Like I'm technically an introvert here. My husband will tell you I'm a closet introvert. I can be really on in a workshop, but then I'm emotionally and physically tired afterwards, right?
Relate.
Yeah. But I know where I want to put my energies. So community was really important to me. So I put a lot of my energies towards that. And even now, right? Like I'm a big part of the butter community. As you know, Arna, you came to the butter mixer, right? Like I think it's really important for people to have these spaces. And if you wanted to compare it to something, okay, sure, maybe it's like the innovation lab where it's a separate space, but they're more it's the whole community for that, right? But it's like these little pockets of community, and I'm hoping that those influence the industry as a whole, right?
Yeah,
all the little innovation labs.
But I would say it's more like a cafe, right? Like that there's these kind of cool people, and let's go and just chat. And
Exactly.
I guess so, yeah.
It's not a top-down thing, which is then what more innovation labs
it's more
tended to be.
grassroots, I think. Yeah.
I actually think that is the way organizations will start evolving. I think that is, we see patterns that will end up being the way we organize ourselves. I think that's what's going on, because these are business organizations. And so you're not a traditional company, but you are, because you're professionals and exchange knowledge, you exchange value, and then you go out and make money the way, with your own business.
Yeah.
this is how this is an ecosystem
This
of
is the
teams
way.
of people. This is the way. I think so. No, I truly think so. It's not maybe the only way, but is one of the
I
ways that
know. Yes.
business is going is already evolving. If you look at it, you look at
Communities.
all the
Yeah.
communities because of the online possibilities that we have. I mean,
Hmm.
the last 10 years or so. I mean, the amount of communities that have grown because of technology. And
Yeah.
I think we take it for granted because it's so common and there's so many of them. But if you think about it, we didn't have
It's true.
those 20 years ago. That was not a thing, right? And
Yeah.
it has huge impact on us professionally and
Yeah.
personally, right? So I think,
That's a great point. Like 20 years ago, you had Chamber of Commerce. At
yeah,
least, yeah, right? So you
exactly.
had like these
Yeah.
very
Yes.
business-oriented organizations,
Yes.
which have translated into now very organic
Yes.
communities. And I think the organic part of it is what makes it so effective. I think, and I've been in communities before that I think are over curated, too
Mm.
promotional, too kind of that. I think it needs to stay organic
Yeah.
to be effective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally
So,
agree.
And
So
that's a, yeah. And it's interesting though, like to find the dials, right? Because you can throw a bunch of like-minded people in a room
mhm.
and they might have a great afternoon, but is anything necessarily going to grow roots from that, right? So like what are
Yeah,
the elements that you need to kind of start something?
well, you need a purpose. You need a
yeah.
reason to get together. So
Got
it's
to
an organ.
rally around something.
Yeah, these are it's what a real organization also needs. You need
Mm.
to have a purpose. You need to do something together, and
Yeah,
everybody's there voluntarily. So it's the
yeah,
ideal organization.
yeah,
And remember we did the Wednesday Web Jam for many years because of COVID, and
Oh
every Wednesday
yes.
we do an experiment learning how to facilitate online because nobody knew how to do that. But after a while, that purpose wasn't there anymore.
yeah.
So we had a funeral, which was, we
Beautiful.
literally had
Oh, that's
yeah,
We had
fantastic.
we had a
yeah,
funeral for the innovation playground as well, and it was
Oh,
beautiful, right? Like
yeah.
we
You
closed
need
yeah.
this
to,
thing that
yeah,
no longer, yeah.
Yeah,
because
that's
that's
really, really
yeah,
interesting that you talk about the purpose. I think, coming from a branding background as well, I think there's no problem with purpose, but I think the problem with purpose in the public's eye is that the term has become very
yeah,
bastardized. And when you tell people they need a purpose, they think automatically very fluffy, social impacty, right? Because that's the way it's been used in a lot of ways. But when
mm,
I, do things like right brand strategies, that's not what it is. It's just, why do you exist beyond making money?
yeah,
Like it's what is that focus? What is that focus that you're rallying everyone around? And I think the problem a lot of times is how people interpret words. Same thing with workshop, right? People bring a lot of bias to the word workshop before even knowing what it is
yeah.
that you're doing.
Mm.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Language is often a problem. It's helpful too when you have it, but it's often the biggest problem really
yeah.
because it means different things to different people. So yeah, I could talk to you forever. Again,
I'm
what
going
are
to take that as
you?
a compliment.
Yeah, you should. Oh yeah, so
Yeah.
definitely. What are you excited about when you think about the future?
Ooh, this is an interesting one because I'm about to make kind of a big shift in my mindset of the type of work that I'm taking on.
Also,
I'm excited to put more of me in my work and do what brings me joy and focus more on these workshopping and facilitation things as opposed to strategy, which is where I've kind of been stuck because of things like income and cash flow and things like that, right? And
mm,
taking on those things. And, I'm in a very lucky position where I have a partner who supports me. And, my husband, like, is very supportive of what I want to do while I'm making these changes,
mm,
right? Like,
yeah,
I had a 9 to 5 when he started his company. And so we kind of shift that support, but this
mm,
actually was a big realization to me, a big part. It was very timely because yesterday, right? So I had a big shift in my mindset yesterday about kind of thinking truly about what brings me joy. And this is going to be a funny story because we went to yoga last night. So we go to a surrender yin yoga class, and it was a new teacher, and we went there. And there was a lot of meditation around self acceptance and choosing a word and focusing on that word and focusing on also sending that word to others. And so my word was joy. And so she did this meditation about kind of focusing on that word, focusing on another person, and then sending that word to that other person. Now, I am not usually a very meditation focused person. I'm more active meditation because my brain doesn't quiet, it doesn't stillness. Right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and, but I think I was in a place where I needed to hear that last night. And kind of, it was like, okay, well, what is going to bring me that? Right. And so I think that's where my brain went with my work. So,
That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
So being
I think that's so important. I think everybody should kind of go through that kind of that kind of either transition or movement or that kind of realization or
yeah,
just thinking about what brings you joy. I think that is, if you take some time, because I think I'm not sure if it needs meditation, but it needs at least a
introspection.
moment introspection, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where you go
Hmm.
like, yeah, and it really relates. A friend of mine, before I started Future Skills Academy, said, because I'm still a bit lost, to be quite honest, but because after design thinking and service design, I'm like, what's next? I don't know what to do anymore. So having sort of this kind of moment where I didn't really know what direction I should take, this friend of
Hmm.
mine said, okay, think about, what, and he said, when did your heart made a leap or something? He said, when did
Mm,
Mm.
it kind of like, when like, this is a nice moment. And I thought about it and I thought, oh, often it is because I teach someone something or I show them an option and
hmm.
the penny drops and I
Mm,
Mm.
see it and they go like, oh, this really, oh, wow, this helps. And it can be
yeah,
such a little thing. Sometimes it's such a tiny little thing I showed them and it makes a difference. And I thought,
hmm,
oh, that's actually what I really like, and not
yeah,
trying to kind of change the culture of a corporate organization. Because
yeah,
that's like really, that's so frustrating. But
yeah,
actually changing, the world, by changing one person,
yeah.
that idea, I love
I,
that.
I love
Yeah.
that too. Morgan, I'm curious, what makes your heart flutter like that?
That's a great question. And also something that I've been reflecting on lately. And for me, I love uncovering insights, right? So having these podcast conversations, right? People will have this kind of conversation, and it tends to be that one or two themes kind of jump out. And while I love uncovering insights also with the work I do at the university and also in research, but I also love making this knowledge tangible. So whether it's, bringing it in a concrete example to the class or writing a research paper or, putting something together in a book, like it's really
Hmm.
work like uncovering the insights and then making them tangible. But I love doing it in collaboration. If I try to do
Hmm.
this on my own, it doesn't bring me as much leaping
Ah.
joy.
I love that. And kind of going back to kind of where it was like what brings me joy, right? Beyond that kind of general aspect of workshopping and facilitation, one of the first questions I ask people, and I actually ask it many times in my Calendly links when people schedule a coffee chat with me, is what's the last thing that made you smile, right? What made you grin, like that big toothy grin, right? Right now I have a client where I am embedded on their team and coaching, doing facilitation coaching of the team members. And that's something I asked them in the Slack channel, right? Before we even started jumping into our one on one. Because for me, even just the act of them thinking about that thing and then re-smiling kind
Mhm.
of puts their brain in a place where I feel like we're starting off on the right vibe. And I think that's really important to kind of start off in that place. And one of my favorite quotes is from Gary Ware. You might have heard me say this before, I don't know. Childlike is not childish. And
Mm.
I think that's what
Mm.
brings me joy, being able to see people know that they can have this childlike curiosity and wonder in their work, even if it's a serious topic, or even if their work makes them feel like they need to be super serious all the time, right? Because the only way they're going to get to creative ideas is if they let their whole kind of being go into a creative place, right? So
I really like that. Childlike is not childish. Yeah.
yeah, because a lot of times when you say, "Oh, we're going to bring play," and I try not to use the word play as much because of that bias thing that people bring, right? But when you try to help people tap into their weird, they get a little weird in a different way sometimes. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you for this interview. Thank you for being on this podcast. It was really inspirational and lots to process again.
Yeah.
So
Lots of insights to gather, right, Morgan?
I have post-it notes written down. Yes.
yeah, it's very cool. I love that. Yeah. So thank you so much. And would love to know more about your whatever adventure you're going to get into and
The next phase
yeah
of joy.
So would I.
yeah, totally. We will obviously we'll keep in touch. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I love this. Like you said, I could probably talk to you all day, but I know we got things to do.
We've got things to do. Yeah, exactly. No, thank you so much.